Alright guys, today we're talking about ancient Egypt, the second of our river valley civilizations. So make sure you have your note packets out, ready to go, so we can get started here. So the Egyptian civilization was settled in northeast Africa, located near the Middle East, close to the Mesopotamian civilization. So we know that this part of the world is very dry and arid, especially Egypt, which is located in the Sahara Desert. So for this reason, the people are going to settle along the Nile River because of the same reasons that we talked about with Mesopotamia. All right, areas around there had fertile land. It was good for planting crops, for transportation, for water supply, and for animals as well. So Egypt, the way it's set up, it's a little confusing. We have Upper Egypt and we have Lower Egypt. Now you may be asking yourself, well, why is lower up and why is upper low? All right. The Nile River actually flows from the south all the way to the north to the Mediterranean Sea. So it starts all the way down here in the south from the waterfall to 100 miles of the Mediterranean Sea. So about right there. So this all consists of Upper Egypt. Okay? And Lower Egypt is from that point down to the Mediterranean Sea where we have the Nile Delta. Now a delta is a triangle shaped area of marshland where the river begins to splinter off. So you can see at this point, right past Giza, the Nile River starts to splinter off and then flow into the sea. Now, the Nile is the longest river in the world, and it provided the ancient Egyptians with an area 10 miles wide of fertile land. And they grew a variety of crops that they needed, most noticeably wheat and flax. And flax was a plant whose fibers could be woven together and used to be made into clothing. Now, the Nile flooded like the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, but was different in that it flooded predictably every year. So if you remember in Mesopotamia, these rivers flooded unpredictably, which was very chaotic for the Mesopotamians, and they really relied on irrigation to make sure that they had enough crop yields. Now, in the Nile River Valley, they used irrigation more to store water, because remember, they are located around the Sahara Desert, and there were many dry seasons. So in order to make sure that their crops grew, they had to use irrigation to create dikes and reservoirs in case there was a dry season. They had adequate water reserves. Now, rule in Egypt was a monarchy, and the Egyptian rulers were called pharaohs. So these were the kings. And later on in Egyptian history, we actually have some female pharaohs, which was very unusual for the ancient world for a woman to have so much power. And the pharaohs believed that they were divine or related to the gods in some way, shape, or form. And we'll see throughout the course of our study this year that a lot of rulers will claim to be related to the gods in some way, and therefore believe they have absolute or complete power. And a lot of times this power is passed down through the generations or hereditarily. And therefore we have these ruling families created called dynasties. So we'll see dynasties for the first time here in Egypt, but they're also very prominent in ancient China. Now, as I talked about before, Egypt was broken up into two kingdoms, the upper and the lower kingdoms. And in about 31 BC, a king named Menes, king of Upper Egypt, united these two regions and set up a capital at Memphis, and therefore created the united Egypt that we think of. So the Nile River became a very useful tool for uniting this society because it became the highway linking the north and the south. So now goods and messengers and armies could be sent up and down the Nile as need be. Religion was a huge component of ancient Egyptian life as well. So they were also polytheistic, again, believing in many gods, like the Mesopotamians, and importantly, believed in an afterlife. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the process of mummification. So you can see a little cartoon on the left-hand side here shows a man being mummified. And this body was preserved using certain chemicals, and their organs were removed and put into jars that you can see below here, because the Egyptians believed that there was an afterlife and that you needed to prepare the body in order to enter the afterlife. So Egypt was divided up into social classes. And as we're going to see with social hierarchies, the higher up in the pyramid, the fewer number of people, but the more concentration of power. The lower the pyramid, you have more people, but less concentration of power. So in Egypt, the pharaoh held the most power, and again, they were only one in number, followed by the priests, farmers, and then the slaves. Now, women in Egypt at this time actually had more freedom than any other ancient civilization. So we're going to see throughout the course of the year that women play lesser roles to men. So it was the exception, not the rule, if women played a larger role in societies. And in Egypt, at different times, a woman was actually the pharaoh, which is the highest of the social statuses that you can have. So very, very much important in the course of history here. So just to reiterate what we're talking about. So you can see with the pyramid here, the pharaoh is at the very, very top. One person having the most power, followed by priests and nobles, a few more people, traders, artisans, shopkeepers, scribes, a few more, farmers and herders, a lot more, and then unskilled workers and slaves who make up the majority of the population. So the Egyptians had many achievements, especially in the field of medicine. So they learned to cure many illnesses and perform surgeries, and this had a lot to do with their practice of mummification. So when a person died, they would preserve the body and extract some of their organs. So they would perform surgeries on these cadavers or dead bodies that would give them knowledge that they could use to help treat and cure illnesses with living people. They also developed a calendar similar to the one that we use today based on their study of astronomy, the stars, the planets, the sun. They also created a picture writing system called hieroglyphics. Again, this is when you have pictographs or small pictures that represent a letter or a word. Okay? And then they have surviving temples and monuments, okay, most notably the pyramids of Giza, which show some aspect of their daily life or something of value to their society. So the pyramids were a place where the pharaohs were buried, so it was a monument to their greatness. So here's just a couple of examples of some of their accomplishments. We have the hieroglyphic system, where you can see that each picture represents a letter in their alphabet. We have the calendar, again showing that they're advanced and they had advanced knowledge of the stars and the sun and the planet, and the concept of time as well. And then the monument here, the twin temples of Abu Simbel, showing important figures in Egyptian society. Okay, so make sure you finish up your notes, guys. Answer your questions. Write down if you have any questions for me, so you can bring that into class tomorrow, and I can answer them for you.